So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all these unnecessary things. Then just say that, no, I'll just remove all the other things as well. Fire event dot click of get by test ID clicker. All right. And then once I do that, I have to make sure that particular function has been called. Now, how do I check that function has been called or not? Well, okay, fine. Normally, what will happen, guys? What did happen when I clicked it? I got the message of done something, right? Now, how was that possible? Well, I passed the prop of do something, and it was a function of console log, right? It ran whenever I clicked the button, correct? Yes or no? That is exactly what I'm going to look for. I am going to look for this function called amount. That's it. How would I do that? Well, all I have to do is just make sure that I come to the test file and say expect dummy original function to being have called times 1. Because if you could remember, I'm clicking that button. When I click that button, then obviously my function would have been called. So now can you understand? Actually, it should be to have been. To have been. Yeah. So it's to have been called times. Now are you able to get it, people? I render this element, I click that button, and now I am expecting that function to be called at least once. Now, if I fire the event twice, I should be expecting it to be called twice, because that is exactly what would happen in the real world. If I come and click this button, it's adding the console log n number of times, as many times I'm clicking it. That is exactly what is happening here, right? So now what I'll do is I'll just come here and have the yarn run test and see for it. And yes, it has been passed successfully. Now, where do I get this message of click me? Oh yeah, that is because I have the screen debug here. Let me remove that as well. And yes, it has been passed successfully. Now, what I'll do is I'll purposefully make this value as 1, okay, and show you. Now, as you can see, it expected the number of calls as 1, but I have received it as twice. So this is exactly how to check a particular function. So now the last topic for this lecture. How do we test for asynchronous code? But before that, I need to get some dependencies here. Let me just grab my Axios package with the help of yarn, add Axios. All right, the Axios package has been done. What I'm going to do now is I am going to just have a list of stories or a list of users, and I'm going to populate them inside a list, just like a normal thing, whatever you would see normally. All right. So let me just do them inside the search component itself. I mean, now at this point, the search component doesn't make no sense of the name of the particular thing. But yeah, since I do have the state value here, I'm using that to my advantage. Otherwise, I need to convert this to a class component, which will take some time. That's right. All right, so now what I'll do is I'll just make sure that I get the stories value, right? And then it will be null at first. Okay. So now instead of setting this timeout, I'm going to originally call this in a right way. All right. So what I'll do is I'll just instead of stories, let me get users. Users. Okay. And if you want to jog up your memory, let me just go inside HTTPS request.in/API/users. If I make this request, you can see that I get a JSON data back, and I have a data array. Inside that data array only, I'll be having all the names. Okay, so I'm just going to populate those names real quick. All right, great. So I'm just going to make this as an async function, and then I am going to use Axios here as well. Import Axios from Axios, right? And then here I'm just going to say const data, And then inside this data is what this entire object will be. So please don't confuse with this property of data and what I am having. The data property, what I am using here is part of Axios. Axios will itself have a data property. I know it seems confusing, but it is how it is. Axios will have its own data property, and that data property is the entire object. So we need to say data dot data. Okay, so that is why I'm going to destructure here directly as data of data. Okay, so it will be await of Axios dot get, and then I'll pass https regress dot in slash API slash users. Okay, it's as easy as that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the state of this dot set state and then have my data. It's as easy as that. Right? Let me come back and visit the element whether I have set it up correctly. Let me come back to the state. I do have no errors, but let me just check it. And yeah, I do have all the data here, as you can see. So firstly, I am going to have a UL element inside. And again, once again, this element name has no sense from now on. It's just that I'm going to populate everything in one component because of the ability of keeping a state. Okay, so now UL elements will now have the check once again, the conditional check. So what I'll see is if this dot state dot users is available, only then I have to map it with the help of this dot state dot users dot map, and then have each user and then render the key property of user.id, and then I'm going to say user. Well, let me just see here. It would be first name as well as last name. So it would be first name as well as user dot last name. Okay. So I guess it is done. I do have a bug here. Let me just see. Where do we have that bug? Oh yeah, that's because I didn't have the fallback condition. Or else I need to have the null value for it. So now if I save it and run it, you would see I would be getting all the values in Jiffy. I have set, oh, fine. That is my mistake. It should be this dot set state of users, and then that should be assigned to data. My bad, sorry for that. And now I'll be able to get the values here. Yes, I was able to get the values. Now the thing is, point number one, I cannot use this API for my testing because this would be so unreliable. One thing you have to always understand, people, the point of testing is only limited to your domain. You cannot be concerned about their API's testing boundaries. It's up to them. They have to make sure that the API is error-free. Your job is to make sure that your application reacts to whatever you have desired. So always keep that in mind. You should never try to test the API. Again, provided if you are the owner of the API, then you should have the tests inside the API, not inside the front end. If you are wishing to have your own API and get it connected, you need to test those things inside the API functionality, not in the front end. Okay, so that is point number one. Point number two is we need to somehow mimic how Axios is working, because obviously we cannot come here and change, right? The component will still stay the same. If you could remember very carefully, did we ever change the prop of do something here? The particular prop function of do something, did we ever change it in the component? No, right? We were doing everything inside the test itself. So we do have two problems here. Problem number one, we need to somehow replace this with our own data. And problem number two, we need to redirect this particular package to our own data. So how are we going to do that? Well, that is where the mocking functionality comes into play. We can able to mock a certain package, and then we can implement that mock function to whatever we like. Now, before going into that mock implementation, I want to say something regarding the package Axios itself. Do we call Axios as a function directly, or do we call a method of that package? You need to keep that in mind very carefully, what I just said.